Welcome to Protiviti's Board Perspectives, where we go inside C-suites and the boardroom to talk about today's most pressing issues and their implications for tomorrow. I'm your host, Joe Cornick, and our guest today is Heidi Crebo-Rediker, a senior fellow in the Center for Geoeconomic Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations, specializing in international political economy, U.S. economic competitiveness, economic security, and global finance. She previously served in the Obama administration as the State Department's first chief economist and as a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on the United States. She's been on CNN, CNBC, the BBC, and was named one of the Wall Street Journal Europe's top 25 women in business. Today, she'll be speaking with Protiviti Managing Director and Global Risk and Compliance Lead, Matt Moore. Matt, I'll turn it over to you to begin.
Great. Thanks, Joe. And Heidi, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation to speak. I also want to thank Joe for his very, very kind introduction today. It's great to be back.
Great. Well, let's start out big picture. What do you see as the biggest threats to global businesses right now?
So I think it's a lot of it is navigating the uncertainty. I mean, that's kind of the buzzword of the year. But, we're entering a period where, very highly likely it's lower growth, it's higher inflation, higher volatility. And so, we have, I guess it's good news and bad news because we've had a lot of experience navigating uncertainty through COVID and the various supply chain shocks, navigating the geopolitical uncertainty around US-China strategic competition, and the commodity shocks coming from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But I think companies in that period became a lot more agile. The uncertainty we're seeing right now is really a different kind of beast. It's really intentional uncertainty coming out as a feature of the Trump presidency, not a bug. And it's both on the trade and economic side, and also on the national security side. So it's sort of coming in two different fronts. So I think when I think about the biggest risk, it's really, can companies manage this shift to really a different level of uncertainty, and then taking that just one more step from a macro perspective. There is a general ambition to undo and remake the whole of the global economic and security architecture. And that architecture really underpinned the post-World War II rules-based world. So I think most companies and investors are not quite prepared for the fallout that means when we land in kind of a new status quo at the end of this.
Yeah. I mean, and with all that, it might be hard to see, but any opportunities from where you sit today?
Sure. I think one of the big lessons to take away is that there are a lot of opportunities, and it's not a good time to sit back. It is actually a time to look and see where those opportunities are. I would flag Europe has made a massive pivot towards defense and infrastructure spending. It's one of the most consequential shifts that we've had in their investment landscape today. And so as a bloc, the EU is not only increasing their collective defense budgets in response to geopolitical threats, but they're also increasing their public investment in energy and digital infrastructure and green transition. And they're looking to catalyze private capital. So for companies, this could be a once in a generation wave to open up to various opportunities there. And I think one last thing on Europe, they are out there looking to capture US science and technology talent. So they see an opportunity in recapturing innovation. Other parts of the world, certainly Gulf states, emerging markets, a lot of places for the new status quo to land that will provide, I think, a significant number of opportunities.
So Heidi, you mentioned the kind of the volatility, the uncertainty, the fact that over the last 5 years or so, it's actually become something that we're pretty accustomed to, and businesses have built agility. But kind of with that, as well as the threats that we're seeing, what's your view on whether or not traditional risk management strategies are sufficient? Should boards and business leaders be pulling other levers to try to navigate this environment?
So I think there are certain business strategies that are that have been employed and helpful over the course of the various shocks that we've had over the past 5 years. But I would say that this is realize first that this is not just another cycle. This is actually a structural shift. So the rules that have governed global investment and supply chains and the whole of the geopolitical alignment over the past 3 decades actually are changing. So this should not be a freeze point. This should be a time when businesses look to, we had a China plus one strategy, meaning, operations companies would have a China for China strategy and rest of world. Look at the US plus one strategy and have a US, a significant US strategy. And then look at the rest of the world and how the, how various rest of the world platforms and neutral geographies are bridges and not battlegrounds. And that means opportunities for digital and logistics infrastructure. Are you, what kind of agility are you actually baking in, and are you doing that throughout, throughout your company, or is it just really one or two people sitting in a legal office that are sort of coming up with a few scenarios? It really needs to be a whole of company effort to think outside the box.
I mean, it certainly seems like a unique inflection point where, the flip side of uncertainty is opportunity, and kind of risk management very much ingrained in strategy. And seemingly it's the strategic choices that are made now that will kind of best determine business's success in this new environment.
I think that's right. And I think that one of the greatest threats is actually strategic inertia right now. So if you wait for clarity in a world that is right now defined by ambiguity, you could get blindsided with no scenarios, all risk, no opportunity. And that, I think, would probably be the worst place to be right now.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, if we maybe zoom in on just kind of the trade policy and trade outlook, clearly it's still being played out, but just curious, kind of what you're seeing in terms of impact on the overall global economy. And then, additionally, are there things that business leaders or boards, could be doing today that could best kind of both protect themselves from further fallout, but also be well positioned to take advantage of opportunities that are presented?
So again, I think that this it's very hard to predict these days about what's going to happen in the next 2 to 5 years. But I do believe that the Trump administration has launched a maximalist trade war against, first and foremost, its closest allies and markets, and that was, I think, one of the biggest shocks. And at the end of this, we still have, in the decrease in the 90-day pause with China from 145 down to 30%. 30% is still pretty high in when you're looking at tariffs. So I think we end up with a world that is very much reshaped in terms of trade flows. I do think that there are opportunities that will be coming in the next 2 years. I'm never one to bet against the US, but I think into 2026, you're going to see new trade relationships completely reconfigured, possibly to de-risk from the US. You could see Europe in its expansion, signing, maybe following the UK's footsteps, both with the comprehensive, the CPTPP, and then also with follow the UK's footsteps in negotiating an FTA with India, which should hopefully happen this year. There are a lot of different ways that you can see reconfiguration playing out in the trade space in particular. And I think companies that will win the next decade are not the ones that actually try and predict the future, but they're the ones that are going to be building in the dynamic capabilities to sort of bake in that how do you navigate volatility, and it's from Washington to Beijing to Jakarta, and it's really looking at the whole of the global map.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of that, kind of those that kind of try to predict will likely be challenged. But maybe more broadly, do you have any advice for businesses that are trying to, build upon the agility that they've built into their operations, over the last several years, but more importantly, building the resilience so they're future ready and kind of able to react to how things play out?
So businesses are getting much better at negotiating all types of uncertainty. But I think in terms of how businesses approach geopolitical risk in isolation from core commercial planning needs to change. So I think that's one common misstep, is really approaching that basket of geopolitical risk outside of the core commercial planning. And I think another is overreacting. So rushing to exit markets like China or the U.S. When a more calibrated presence could open up long-term opportunities in that scenario where you do the China plus one, U.S. plus one localized markets. So I think the firms that are best positioned are the ones that are going to be doubling down on the scenario planning and investing in intelligence and foresight functions, and actively shaping and not just reacting to the environments in which they operate.
Thank you for that. All right, final question. So as we look out, maybe the rest of 2025 or 2026, what do you see coming? What can we start to expect?
So again, I think I think if you go back to the fact that we are in a global realignment of both the economic and the national security architecture, that we're going to be 2 years into that, and we already have seen that you can have so much change in such a quick amount of time since President Trump came into office. And there's a trust factor here that that it's going to that the lack of trust right now in the U.S. in terms of everything from its regulatory future to its fiscal future to its negotiation and transactional nature. So I do think that the rest of the world, with Europe and Japan and South Korea, some of the countries in Latin America, you're going to see a broad reconfiguration, and it's not just emerging markets and developed markets. It's really going to be where that trust will reemerge in trading and investment. So I think you're just going to see a very quick realignment. I don't think it's going to take anywhere near as long as, for example, it's taken in the past to negotiate new trade agreements. I think you're going to see a very quick reconfiguration. So be prepared for it.
All right, we will be ready. Well, Heidi, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. And Joe, back over to you.
Thanks, Matt. And thanks, Heidi, for those insights. And thank you for watching Protiviti's Board Perspectives. I'm Joe Cornick. We'll see you next time.